Good morning, and I would like to thank Hollis Clifton for being here with us this morning. And we are having a smaller attendance at our media conference today, both in terms of might not being joined by the MSJ colleagues because, of course, of the additional COVID-19 restrictions, which limits the numbers of persons to gather. Although we're in a private place, we are still trying to adhere as much as we can to the COVID-19 regulations. Before I begin to speak to the topic of the media conference, which was scheduled and media informed yesterday morning, I would like us just to observe a moment's silence for O.C. Leonard, who tragically was murdered sometime yesterday. And I will say who O.C. is in a moment. I'd just like to observe a moment's silence for this brother. May his soul and the soul of all faithful departed rest in peace. Amen. O.C. Leonard was one of the MSJ's candidates for the the candidate for Springvale Paradise seat in the local government elections of 2019. He was one of several young people whom the MSJ put up as our candidates and who therefore became our standard bearers in the San Fernando City Corporation's regional body. Springvale Paradise, of course, being part of the San Fernando City Corporation. That was when I first met O.C. in 2019. He was a very passionate young man, passionate about his community, about the well-being and lives of the persons who live, particularly in Bacadere, where he himself lived with his children, and also the lives of others who have been less fortunate than the elites in our society. He was very concerned about social justice, of the struggle for social justice at all of our meetings, whether there were candidates meetings, whether there were meetings that he spoke at during the campaign, at which I also joined him, during the walkabouts which I had with him in Bacadere and in one or two other parts of the constituency which he contested, the electoral district which he contested. He was very passionate, and certainly in Bacadere, a lot of the residents with whom I interacted with and who knew O.C. as the candidate were very supportive of the commitment that he had to his community and for the well-being of everyone. So the last time I actually spoke to him was in San Fernando probably about a month ago. I ran into him quite by accident. It wasn't a planned meeting. I had spoken to him several months ago. Every now and then I would call and speak with him and so on to find out how he was doing. But I ran into him about a month ago in San Fernando, not too far from me, just on Top Street, if my memory serves me right. And we chatted for a while, and he said, he was still committed to the MSJ. He was still trying to help people in his community, to get hampers for people who didn't have enough to provide for themselves and their children, and he was still doing the best that he could to help people, to help others, because he really wanted to help other people. He wasn't always in San Fernando, because I know that he has family as well in the Deep South, and he said that he was between the Deep South and San Fernando. And so, since that news hit and we shared it with our activists, many of those who knew him, particularly in the campaign of 2019, other candidates that we put up in that 2019 local government elections, many of them in our activist grouping have commented and have expressed sadness at his passing and condolences, and therefore on behalf of the entire MSJ family, I wish to publicly express condolences to his children and to his mother and other family members. And of course, I will be visiting them over the next few days to express that personally and directly. If I could now move on to the substantive issue that we have come here this morning to speak to, and that is the reactions to the government's latest decision to further restrict activities as a result of the spike in the number of COVID-19 positive cases, the increase in the number of persons who have had to be hospitalized, and sadly, the increase in the number of persons who have died because of COVID. Now, we, the MSJ, have always said from day one, from March, we have always said that we would follow the science. We are very much committed to the medical science with respect to this pandemic, and we also have supported the government's approach to try and deal with the health aspect of the pandemic. But we also said from the very beginning, from March last year, more than a year ago, and certainly we articulated that in our roadmap for recovery and changing of Trinidad and Tobago, which we issued in May, at the 8th, I think, or the 6th of May last year, which is almost a year ago. And both in our public statements, our press releases, our various webinars, and in our roadmap for recovery, we said that there were two issues that had to be addressed simultaneously. One was, how do we deal with the health dimension to ensure that we save people's lives? And then secondly, we said we had to ensure the saving of livelihoods. And while we understood the initial shutdown a year ago in order to try to prevent the spread of the virus, and therefore to save lives, we recognize that that initial 2-month period or 3-month period of significant shutdown was necessary. We ought to have come out of that as a country with a very clear set of proposals to ensure that people's livelihoods would not suffer over a long-term period. But over the last year, there are many sectors of the national community who have seen their livelihoods being adversely affected. And it seems as if the government just does not care. The government said we did something in the beginning, we gave out some grants and so on, and we tried to help some business people, and that was it. We can't do anything more. And it seems as if the government now has folded their arms with a don't care damn attitude, and so it is catch as you could catch can, and catch your tail as people, ordinary citizens in this country. So in the last few days, we have heard from the creative sector, the Calypsonians, other artistic people, performers and so on, who have said that they have suffered tremendously as a result of the shutdown. And now, with no more concerts and shows with an audience and so on, they are going to continue to be in a bad place going forward. Of course, there was no carnival this year. And what is very clear is that the government has had absolutely no plan or policy to ensure that what is perhaps our most vital sector, our creative sector, our artists, our performers, our spoken words and so on, poets and all of our other performers who, as the Calypsonians Association said, contributed tremendously to the psychological well-being of the society during the lockdown, because a number of artists put on free shows, they were posting stuff up on YouTube and on social media to try to help people get through this difficult pandemic period. And many artists also lent their stature and their personality to the health messages about the pandemic to ensure that people adhere to the protocols dealing with the pandemic. Yet they have not been treated well in return. We have one business person speaking on Friday evening from San Fernando at a forum, a virtual forum organized by one of the departments at UE, and Ms. Bartlett was saying that the reports that she's getting is that people, and this has been going on for a long time, that people can't buy a pound of rice, they buy half a pound of rice, they buy a quarter piece of margarine, and so on. They buy a quarter pound of flour, half pound of flour, because they just don't have the money in their pocket to be able to buy more than that. And therefore, there are hundreds of thousands of people who are not making it from payday to payday. Hundreds of thousands of people in this country are suffering, they're in pain, they can't make it from payday to payday. And the government seems to have no plan, nothing in place that will ensure that economic activity will pick up so that people will get employment, those who are not employed, and those who are earning wages that are 8 years old, 2012 wages and so on. The prices have gone up so that the dollar that they had in 2012 is now worth 70 or 80 cents today. And it can't stretch anymore, just can't stretch anymore. There's nothing in place by the government to ensure that people's livelihoods are protected and advanced. And this is a clear dereliction of duty and a failure on the part of the government. Small business people, the self-employed, we heard the maxi drivers complaining because with the public service now going on rotation for 3 weeks, 50%, a lot of public servants who don't have vehicles now and who used to travel in a maxi wouldn't be able to do so going forward. And so the maxi drivers and the taxi drivers are saying, well, hey, we have been taking strain, and all the Minister of Works could say is, you have to make more sacrifices. Well, those maxi taxi drivers and the taxi drivers and so on did make a sacrifice for a long time. There was a period when they were completely shut down. For 3 months they were virtually not on the road. And then they had to operate at 25% capacity, then 50% capacity, 75% capacity or whatever. So they'll be operating with much less revenue. So they have been making a sacrifice, Minister Silva. So don't tell them they have to make a sacrifice. They have been making a sacrifice. But what about those at the top, the controllers, the multi-billionaires? How much of a sacrifice have they made relative to taxis and maxis and entertainers and small business people and micro-enterprises, the self-employed, and so on? So we have an inequality of sacrifice. We have sacrifice, a lot of sacrifice by people at the lower end of the income scale, but relatively little sacrifice by people at the top. Their livelihoods, even if they might not have gotten big dividends on the shares that they own, they have enough money, enough savings, and much of it, many of them have savings in banks abroad, in Miami and London and Cayman Islands and wherever else. So they can continue to live good. They have a lot of fat to live off of based upon their wealth that they've accumulated over the years. But people who didn't have any great amount of wealth or no amount of wealth, they have savings, they're the ones who are suffering. And the government seems completely unconcerned about their well-being. Where's the roadmap for recovery that was much touted by the government as the way forward out of the pandemic in terms of stimulating economic activity, getting people back to work and so on? Where's that roadmap for recovery? I haven't heard a word about it in almost a year, well, since it was produced sometime in June of last year. I haven't heard anything about it. All you heard the Minister of Finance talking about is, well, he can't balance his budget, that's all. But nothing about creating new economic activity that will lead to more people being employed and therefore more taxes being obtained by the government. Because to get growth and revenue, the government has to do things that will stimulate economic activity. But the roadmap for recovery seems doomed, like most of the recommendations that go to governments, to end up in the dustbin of history. So we are very, very concerned about the situation in Trinidad and Tobago, and we are saying as the MSJ that there are many things that can be done. Our roadmap for recovery spoke about the social economy, we said, let us create, have businesses create daycare centers so that more people could be employed, but the children of working people could then be supervised and taken care of, so that our children wouldn't get left behind and so on, so that the parents could go to work comfortably and be productive at work, knowing that their children will be taken care of. We talked about large businesses coming together and providing meals for their employees at a subsidized rate and so on. We said, in the light of the violence against women, that businesses should ensure transportation for their employees. All of these ideas we put forward. We said that the issue of marijuana should be addressed urgently, and that thousands of acres of land, state land, could be provided to the traditional users of the herb so that they could plant and therefore create an economic activity out of that and build wealth for themselves and future generations by going downstream and producing the oils and other things and so on. They could set up small cafes where people could buy legally and so on. But again, nothing has been done in this regard. Our manufacturing sector needs to be supported even more in terms of access to foreign exchange, so they could earn more foreign exchange. So there are so many areas. Our tourism sector, we should have been preparing heritage sites in Trinidad during this last year, so that Faizabad, Labour Heroes Park and Museum, an oil industry museum and information center, targeting together with the Pitch Lake and the site of the Banwari Man. All of that could have become a huge heritage location. East Port of Spain as a heritage city for Pan and Calypso and all of the other heritage of our culture that has come out of East Port of Spain. Creating those centers so that as our borders open up, as they will, once we get sufficient numbers of people vaccinated here, people in the United States who are being significantly vaccinated now are itching to travel, and they would love to come to the Caribbean if we had the kind of attractions that would bring them here in large numbers. And then looking at Tobago and trying to create a relatively biosafe bubble in Tobago would be another major priority, so that the tourism business in Tobago could be get an injection in the arm, not just with vaccine jab, but an economic boost and so on. So there are many ideas that are being proposed. The agricultural stimulus that has been spoken about, but which we are seeing little of in terms of making sure that we are growing more of our own food and then going downstream and being able to export some processed items and so on. None of that seems to be happening at the kind of rate and scale that it ought to have. And all of these things will have ensured the saving of livelihood. So we're not just critical of the PNM, and yes, we are critical of them because they are failing in this regard, but we have also put forward concrete ideas, and others have done so as well, including the roadmap for recovery. But none of that seems to be happening, and so we are here to simply say that Trinidad and Tobago, people of this country, we need really now to build the kind of unity on the ground of the sufferers, of people who are suffering, to fight back against the kinds of policies that are being implemented by this government, policies which are benefiting the wealthy, benefiting the few, while the many suffer. Thank you very much. Okay. Thank you very much.